I was broke, desperate, and one eviction notice away from losing my kids when I took a job I didn't understand. They said she was difficult. They said no one lasted more than a week. What they didn't say was that Lila Monroe wasn't just broken. She was a storm wrapped in silk and scars, and she was about to destroy everything I thought I knew about survival. This is that story. If you want to see where this goes, stay until the end. Hit like, drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. Dorian Blake had $127 in his bank account and 3 days until the landlord changed the locks on his apartment in Inglewood. He sat in his pickup truck outside Washington Elementary, engine off to save what little gas he had left, watching through the chain-link fence as his daughter Mia climbed down from the jungle gym with her pink backpack hanging off one shoulder. She was 8 years old, skinny as a rail, with his dark eyes and her mother's careful way of moving through the world, like she was trying not to take up too much space. Behind her came Eli, his 6-year-old son, dirt smeared across both cheeks and one knee of his jeans torn open from whatever had happened at recess. The kid never stopped moving, never stopped talking, never stopped believing that tomorrow would be better than today. Dorian envied that. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt that kind of hope. The bell rang. Kids poured out of the building in a chaotic stream of backpacks and shouting, and parents waiting in cars that probably had more than a quarter tank of gas. Dorian climbed out of the truck and leaned against the hood, raising one hand when Mia spotted him. She walked over slowly, Eli bouncing along beside her like a puppy who'd had too much sugar. "Dad!" Eli crashed into Dorian's legs, wrapping both arms around his knees. "Coach said I almost scored a goal today." "Almost!" "That's great, bud." Dorian ruffled his son's hair, then looked at Mia. "How was school?" She shrugged. "Fine." "Just fine?" "Yeah." She wouldn't meet his eyes. That was new. Or maybe it wasn't new. Maybe he just hadn't been paying close enough attention lately because he'd been too busy trying to figure out how to keep the lights on and food in the fridge and his mother alive long enough to see another Christmas. "All right," Dorian said, forcing brightness into his voice that he didn't feel. "Let's get home." "Can we get McDonald's?" Eli asked, already climbing into the back seat. "Not today." "Tomorrow?" "We'll see." Mia slid into the passenger seat without a word, buckling herself in with the kind of quiet efficiency that made Dorian's chest ache. 8 years old, and she already knew better than to ask for things they couldn't afford. She'd learned that lesson faster than any kid should have to. Dorian started the engine and pulled into traffic, doing the math in his head for the 1,000th time that week. $127. Rent was $1,200, already 2 weeks overdue. Gas to get through the week would be $40, maybe $50 if he was careful. Groceries. He could stretch $100 if he bought rice and beans and eggs and nothing else. That left nothing for his mother's medication copays, nothing for the electric bill that was already shut off red, nothing for the water bill or the phone or any of the other 1,000 small bleeding wounds that added up to drowning. 3 months ago, he had been making decent money as a mechanic at Rodriguez Auto in Hawthorne. Not great money, but enough. Enough to pay rent on time, enough to take the kids out for pizza on Fridays, enough to help his mom with her medical bills without having to choose between her cancer treatments and his kids eating dinner. Then Carlos Rodriguez's nephew had moved to LA from Phoenix and needed a job, and Dorian, who had a decade of experience and a perfect attendance record and 3 people depending on his paycheck, got let go with 2 weeks severance and a handshake that felt like a knife between the ribs. He'd filed for unemployment the same day. It had taken 3 weeks to kick in, and when it finally did, it wasn't enough. Not even close. He'd burned through his savings in the first month trying to keep everything afloat. Sold his tools in the second month, the good ones he'd spent years collecting, for a fraction of what they were worth. Started doing gig work in the 3rd month. DoorDash, Uber, TaskRabbit, anything that would take him, but the algorithm hated him, or the market was saturated, or he just had shit luck because the jobs were sparse and the pay was insulting and he was still falling further behind every single day. 2 weeks ago, the eviction notice had appeared on his door. Pale yellow paper, official letterhead, 30 days to pay or vacate. He'd stood there staring at it for a full 5 minutes before he'd taken it down and shoved it in a drawer where the kids wouldn't see it. He hadn't told his mother. She had enough to worry about. Celeste Blake was 62 years old and dying of stage 4 lung cancer. She'd worked as a nurse for 40 years, raised Dorian by herself after his father walked out when he was 3, and never once asked anyone for help with anything. When she'd gotten her diagnosis 18 months ago, she'd looked the oncologist dead in the eye and said, "How long do I have?" When he'd said 2 years, maybe less, she'd nodded and said, "Then let's not waste time." The treatments were brutal. Chemo that left her so weak she could barely stand. Radiation that burned her skin and stole her appetite. Medications that cost more than Dorian made in a month, even when he'd had a job. Her insurance had lapsed when she'd retired early, and Medicare didn't kick in for another 3 years. So Dorian paid, or tried to. And when he couldn't pay, he watched her get sicker and told himself he was doing everything he could, even though he knew it wasn't true. Yesterday, everything had changed. He'd been sitting in his truck outside a 7-Eleven, staring at his phone and trying to decide whether to spend his last $20 on gas or food, when a text had come through from Ricky Morales, a guy he used to work with at the shop. "Yo, D, you still looking for work?" Dorian had typed back in under 5 seconds. "Yeah." "What you got?" "Live-in assistant job. Beverly Hills. Rich lady needs help around the house. Pays $8,000 a month plus room and board." Dorian had read the message 3 times to make sure he wasn't hallucinating. $8,000. A month? Plus free housing? What's the catch? She's difficult. Real talk, bro. Last guy quit in 4 days. One before that made it a week. But if you can handle it, the money's legit. What kind of difficult? IDK man, just intense. Demanding. Doesn't put up with bullshit. But $8,000 a month is $8,000 a month. Dorian had sat there for a long moment, his thumb hovering over the keyboard. Live-in meant leaving the kids, leaving his mother, moving into some stranger's house and doing work he didn't fully understand for a woman who apparently chewed through employees like tissue paper. But $8,000 meant rent, medication, food, security, breathing room, a chance to stop drowning. Send me the info. The interview was scheduled for 6 p.m. today at an address in the hills that Dorian had to Google because he'd never been to that part of LA in his life. Now, driving through Inglewood with his kids in the back seat and less than 3 hours until he had to somehow convince a rich stranger to hire him for a job he didn't understand, Dorian felt the weight of every decision he'd ever made pressing down on his chest like a stone. He pulled up outside his mother's duplex in Hawthorne. The paint was peeling off the front door. The lawn was dead. A shopping cart with a broken wheel sat abandoned on the curb, and somewhere down the block, someone's car alarm was going off in a steady, brain-drilling rhythm. Mia and Eli grabbed their overnight bags. Dorian had packed them that morning, telling the kids they were going to have a sleepover at Grandma's, which they'd both accepted without question because they'd been doing this dance for months now, and ran up to the door. Celeste opened it before they knocked. She looked thinner than the last time Dorian had seen her, her skin the color of old newspapers, her hair mostly gone from the chemo. But she was smiling, and when Mia and Eli threw themselves at her, she caught them both and held on like she had strength to spare. Dorian walked up slowly, carrying the bags. His mother looked at him over the kids' heads, and he saw everything she wasn't saying written across her face. Worry, pride, exhaustion, love. "You got this," she said quietly. He nodded. He didn't believe her, but he nodded anyway. "I'll call you tonight," he said, "after the interview." "Don't call me. Just go do what you need to do." "Mom." "Dorian." Her voice was firm, despite the rasp in it. "I raised you by myself while working doubles at County General. I can handle 2 kids for a few weeks." "It might be longer than a few weeks." "Then it's longer." She coughed once, deep and wet, and Dorian felt his stomach twist. "We'll be fine. You go take that job and don't look back." He wanted to argue. Wanted to tell her she was too sick, too weak, that this was asking too much. But he didn't have any other options, and they both knew it. So he kissed his kids goodbye, hugged his mother carefully so he wouldn't hurt her, and drove away before any of them could see how close he was to breaking. The address led him into a neighborhood where the houses didn't have numbers. They had names and gates. and security cameras mounted on stone pillars that probably cost more than Dorian's entire yearly salary back when he'd had a salary. He followed the GPS up a winding private road that snaked into the hills, past estates hidden behind walls of hedges and iron and money. His truck rattled as it climbed, the engine making a noise that suggested it was one bad day away from giving up entirely. The house appeared at the end of a long driveway lined with trees that looked like they'd been planted by a landscape architect who charged by the leaf. It was massive, modern, all glass and white stone in sharp angles that probably had names like brutalist or minimalist in magazines Dorian would never read. He parked near the front entrance and sat there for a moment with his hands on the steering wheel, staring at the building. This was a mistake. He didn't belong here. He was a mechanic from Inglewood with grease under his fingernails and a high school diploma and no idea what a live-in assistant even did. What was he supposed to say in this interview? What was he supposed to wear? He'd put on his cleanest pair of jeans and a flannel shirt that only had one small oil stain near the pocket. And now, looking at this house, he felt like he might as well have shown up in a garbage bag. Before he could talk himself out of it, the front door opened. A woman in her 50s stepped out, dressed in a gray suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who understood geometry. She had a tablet in one hand and an expression on her face that suggested she'd seen 1,000 guys like Dorian walk up this driveway and wasn't particularly impressed by any of them. "Mr. Blake?" she called out. Dorian killed the engine and climbed out. "Yeah, that's me. I'm Caroline, Miss Monroe's estate manager. Follow me, please." She turned and walked back inside without waiting to see if he'd follow. Dorian did, because he didn't know what else to do. The interior of the house was even more intimidating than the exterior. Everything was white or gray or black, marble floors that reflected the overhead lights, furniture that looked like it had been designed by someone who hated the concept of comfort, floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the canyon and the city sprawling out below like a carpet of lights. It was beautiful, and it was cold. Not temperature cold, though the air conditioning was aggressive enough to raise goosebumps on Dorian's arms, but emotionally cold, like a museum, like a place where people existed but didn't live. "Ms. Monroe will meet with you in the sitting room," Caroline said, gesturing toward a doorway off the main hall. "Wait here. She'll be with you shortly." Then she disappeared down a hallway, her heels clicking against the marble, leaving Dorian standing alone in a room that probably cost more to furnish than he'd earn in his entire life. He waited. 5 minutes passed. Then 10. He looked around. There were no photos on the walls, no personal touches, nothing that suggested a human being actually lived here. Just expensive art that Dorian didn't understand and sculptures that looked like they'd been created by someone who'd never seen a human spine. He was about to check his phone when he heard it, a faint mechanical hum, followed by the soft sound of wheels on tile. He turned, and there she was, Lila Monroe. Dorian didn't know what he'd been expecting. Someone older, maybe. Frail, sickly, the kind of person who needed a live-in assistant because they couldn't manage basic tasks. What he got was a woman who looked like she'd been carved out of ice and fury. She was young, mid-20s, if he had to guess. Dark hair pulled back into a sleek ponytail that emphasized the sharp angles of her face, green eyes that looked like they could cut glass, high cheekbones, a jawline that could have sold luxury watches or started arguments. She wore a black sweater and tailored pants, and even sitting in a wheelchair, her posture was perfect. She didn't look weak. She looked dangerous. She wheeled into the room and stopped about 6 feet away, her gaze moving over Dorian with the kind of clinical assessment usually reserved for livestock auctions. "You're the mechanic," she said. Not a question, a statement. "Yeah," Dorian said. "Sit." It wasn't a request. Dorian sat. She wheeled closer, her hands folded in her lap, her expression giving away absolutely nothing. "Caroline says you have 2 children," she said. "That's right." "How old?" 8 and 6. "And you're willing to leave them to work here." Again, not phrased like a question, but it landed like an accusation. Dorian met her eyes. "I'm willing to do what I have to do to keep a roof over their heads." Lila's expression didn't change. "Most people don't last here. The last assistant quit after 3 days. The one before that made it a week. Before you ask, they all have the same complaint. Which is? Me." She said it without a trace of shame or apology, just fact. Dorian waited. I don't tolerate incompetence, Lila continued, her voice flat and precise. I don't tolerate laziness. I don't tolerate people who need their hands held or their feelings validated every 5 minutes. If you're looking for a job where someone thanks you for showing up and pats you on the head when you complete basic tasks, this isn't it. I'm not looking for easy, Dorian said. I'm looking for steady. Steady requires discipline. I've got 2 kids and a dying mother. I know what discipline looks like. For the first time, something flickered in her eyes. Not sympathy, not warmth, something colder, sharper, evaluation. She leaned back slightly in her chair, fingers drumming once against the armrest. The position is live-in, she said. You'll have your own room in the West Wing, meals provided. Your responsibilities include assisting with daily routines, managing household logistics, physical therapy support, errands, and anything else I require. Hours are variable. Some days will be light. Others won't be. You'll have limited time off. If your children have an emergency, we'll make accommodations. Otherwise, your focus is here. Do you understand? Yes. The pay is $8,000 a month, deposited on the 1st. Health insurance included. Dental if you need it. You start tomorrow at 6 a.m. Don't be late. Dorian blinked. That's it? You're hiring me? Do you want the job or not? Yes, I want it. Then we're done here. Caroline will send you the details tonight. Be here tomorrow morning, 6 a.m. sharp. She turned her wheelchair and started to leave. Miss Monroe, Dorian said. She stopped, didn't turn around. Why me? He asked. You haven't even asked me any real questions. You don't know if I can do this job. Lila glanced back over her shoulder, and for a brief second Dorian saw something in her expression that looked almost like recognition. Because you're desperate, she said. And desperate people don't quit. Then she wheeled out of the room, leaving Dorian standing there with a job he didn't understand and a woman he was pretty sure was going to make his life hell. He walked back to his truck in a daze, climbed inside, and sat there for a long moment with his hands on the steering wheel. $8,000 a month. He'd done it. He'd actually done it. He pulled out his phone and called his mother. Well? Celeste's voice was tired but hopeful. I got it, Dorian said. She let out a breath. Thank God. I start tomorrow. Good. That's good, baby. I don't know if I can do this, Mom. Yes, you can. She's... He stopped, trying to find the words. She's a lot. Then be more. Dorian closed his eyes. I miss the kids already. They'll be here when you get back. Right now you focus on that job. You hear me? Yeah, I hear you. I love you, Dorian. Love you too. He hung up and sat there in the driveway of a house that cost more than he'd earn in 10 lifetimes, wondering what the hell he'd just gotten himself into. But Dorian moved into the estate the next morning with a duffel bag, a backpack, and a knot of anxiety sitting in his stomach like a fist. Caroline met him at the door at 5:45 a.m., which meant he'd been sitting in his truck in the driveway for 15 minutes trying to work up the nerve to go inside. You're early, she said, which somehow sounded like a criticism. Didn't want to be late. Good, come. She led him through the house to the West Wing, down a hallway that felt longer than his entire apartment, and stopped at a door near the end. This is yours, she said, opening it. The room was bigger than his living room and bedroom combined. King-sized bed, private bathroom, a desk, a chair, windows that overlooked the canyon. It was nicer than any place Dorian had ever lived. Ms. Monroe's routines are here, Caroline said, handing him a folder. Memorize them. Breakfast is at 7. She takes her coffee black, 1 sugar. Toast, lightly buttered. Eggs if she asks for them, scrambled, not runny. Physical therapy is at 9. Lunch at noon. Dinner at 6. Medications are labeled and dosed. Don't deviate from the schedule unless she tells you to. Dorian took the folder. It was 3 pages long, single-spaced, with timings down to the minute. Any questions? Caroline asked. About 1,000. But Dorian just shook his head. Good. Don't be late. Ishwama. She left. Dorian sat on the edge of the bed and opened the folder. 6:00 a.m. Wake. Prepare coffee and breakfast. 7 a.m. Serve breakfast in the sitting room or bedroom, depending on Ms. Monroe's preference. 7:30 a.m. Assist with morning routine, transferring, dressing if requested, medication. 9 a.m. Physical therapy session. You will assist therapist as needed. 10:30 a.m. Free time. Remain available. 12 p.m. Lunch. The list went on and on. Every hour accounted for. Every task spelled out in meticulous detail. Dorian read it twice, then got to work. The first day was a test. He understood that immediately. Lila gave him tasks, simple ones, and watched to see how he'd handle them. The books in the study need to be reorganized, she said that morning, her tone clipped and businesslike. Alphabetically by author, not by title. Author. Got it. The plants on the terrace need water, not too much, not too little. Figure it out. Okay. I'm expecting a delivery at 2 p.m. Sign for it. Don't let them ring the doorbell. Dorian did all of it without complaint. Reorganized the books, which took 2 hours because there were hundreds of them, and half didn't have the author's name on the spine. Watered the plants, guessing at how much was right, and hoping he didn't kill anything. Waited by the front door at 2 p.m. and intercepted the UPS driver before he could knock. By the end of the day, Lila hadn't said thank you. Hadn't said much of anything, actually, except to give him more tasks. But she also hadn't fired him. That felt like a victory. So, the second day she pushed harder. I need help transferring to the therapy table, she said that morning, her voice flat. Dorian approached carefully. He'd helped his mother with transfers before, from bed to wheelchair, wheelchair to car, so he understood the mechanics. But everybody was different, and he didn't want to hurt her. Tell me how you want to do this, he said. Lila's jaw tightened. Just do it. I need to know how you're comfortable moving. I said just do it. Dorian held his ground. I'm not going to hurt you because you're too stubborn to give me instructions. Her eyes flashed. For a second, he thought she might actually lose it, yell at him, fire him on the spot. Instead, she exhaled sharply through her nose and said, left side. Support under the shoulder and hip on 3. They moved together, smooth, controlled. When she was settled on the table, she didn't look at him. Fine, she said quietly. It was the closest thing to approval he'd gotten. By the end of the first week, Dorian had learned 3 critical things about Lila Monroe. 1, she was in constant pain. She hid it well, too well. But he could see it in the way her hands gripped the armrests of her wheelchair when she thought no one was looking, in the tightness around her eyes, in the way she moved, careful and controlled, like every motion cost her something. 2, she didn't trust anyone. Not Caroline, who'd been with her for 2 years. Not the physical therapist who came 3 times a week. Not the housekeeper or the gardener or anyone else who worked for her. And definitely not Dorian. 3, she was testing him. Every task, every interaction, every sharp comment, she was waiting for him to break. Waiting for him to quit like all the others. But Dorian didn't break. He showed up on time. Did the work. Kept his mouth shut when she snapped at him for things that weren't his fault. Responded with calm when she tried to provoke him. And slowly, very slowly, something started to shift. Whoa. It happened 2 weeks in. Lila had a bad day. Dorian could tell from the moment he walked into her room that morning with her coffee. She was pale, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to button her shirt. I've got it, she bit out before he could offer help. He stepped back. Waited. She fumbled with the buttons for another 30 seconds, her frustration building with every failed attempt, before she let out a sound that was half growl, half sob, and slammed her hand against the armrest of her wheelchair. I can't even get dressed, she said, her voice raw and broken. I can't do anything anymore. Dorian moved forward slowly, giving her space to refuse. Let me help, he said quietly. I don't need... Yeah, you do, and that's okay. She looked up at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, he saw past the armor. Saw the fear, the exhaustion, the rage at her own body for betraying her, Her eyes were wet. He finished the buttons without a word, then stepped back. "You're still here," she said quietly. "Where else would I be? Most people leave. When it gets hard, they leave. I'm not most people." Lila stared at him for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. Then, so quietly he almost didn't hear it, she said, "Thank you." It was barely a whisper, but Dorian heard it, and he nodded. Things changed after that. Not dramatically, not all at once, but in small, incremental ways that added up to something bigger. Lila stopped treating him like an employee she expected to fail and started treating him like someone she could rely on. She asked for his opinion on things. Small things at first, whether to keep a painting, whether the new physical therapist was any good, whether he thought the schedule made sense. Then bigger things. "Do you think I'm wasting my time?" she asked one afternoon while they sat on the terrace after her therapy session. "With what?" "All of this. The exercises. The treatments. Pretending I'm going to get better." Dorian looked at her, really looked. "I don't think you're pretending," he said. "I think you're fighting. There's a difference. What if I lose?" "Then you lose, but at least you'll know you tried." Lila was quiet for a long moment. "That's very pragmatic of you," she said. "I'm a pragmatic guy. Most people would tell me to stay positive, keep hoping, believe in miracles. I'm not most people." She smiled, small, faint, but real. "No," she said. "You're not." 3 weeks in, Dorian called his kids every night before bed. "How's Grandma?" he'd ask. "She's okay," Mia would say, her voice small and careful. "Tired." "You two being good for her?" "Yeah, Dad." "I miss you both." "Miss you too." It hurt, every single time, but he kept calling, kept showing up, even from a distance, because that's all he could do. One night, after a particularly hard call where Eli had cried because he didn't understand why Dorian couldn't come home yet, Dorian sat on the edge of his bed with his head in his hands. He was failing them. No matter how much money he was making, no matter how stable this job was, he was still failing his kids by not being there. There was a knock on his door. "Come in," he said without looking up. The door opened. Dorian glanced up. Lila was there, in her wheelchair, hesitating in the doorway. "Are you okay?" she asked. "Yeah, just tired." "Liar." Dorian almost smiled. "My son doesn't understand why I'm not home. He's 6. He doesn't get it." Lila wheeled inside, stopping a few feet away. "Does your daughter understand?" "Yeah, too well. She's 8 and she already knows how to pretend everything's fine when it's not. That's hard." "Yeah." Lila was quiet for a moment, then she said, "For what it's worth, you're doing the right thing, being here, providing for them. They might not understand it now, but they will." "Will they?" "Yes, because you're not abandoning them. You're sacrificing for them. There's a difference." Dorian looked at her. "You really believe that?" "I have to. Otherwise, what's the point of any of this?" He nodded slowly. Lila started to leave, then stopped. "Dorian?" "Yeah?" "You're a good father. Don't let guilt convince you otherwise." She left before he could respond. Dorian sat there for a long time, staring at the door, feeling something in his chest loosen just slightly. Ditch. A month in, Lila had a breakthrough in physical therapy. She managed to stand, fully stand without support, for 15 seconds. It didn't sound like much, but for someone who'd spent 2 years in a wheelchair, 15 seconds was everything. When the therapist told her to sit back down, Lila was shaking, sweating, but she was smiling. Dorian had been in the corner of the room, watching, and when their eyes met, he saw something in her expression he hadn't seen before. Hope. After the session, Lila sat on the terrace, staring out at the canyon. Dorian brought her water without being asked. "I stood," she said, her voice quiet and wondering. "Yeah, you did. I didn't think I'd ever be able to do that again." "Shows what you know." She laughed. It was a real laugh, bright and unguarded, and it startled both of them. "Thank you," she said. For what? For believing I could do it before I did? Dorian shrugged. I'm just the guy who handed you water. No, you're more than that. He didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. They sat in silence for a while, the afternoon sun warm on their faces, and Dorian thought that maybe, just maybe, this job wasn't the mistake he'd thought it was. Maybe it was exactly where he needed to be. The shift didn't happen overnight, but Dorian felt it like the change in air pressure before a storm. By week 5, Lila had stopped timing how long he took to complete tasks. She'd stopped correcting him for minor things that didn't actually matter. She'd stopped watching him like a supervisor waiting for an employee to screw up so she'd have an excuse to fire them. Instead, she started asking questions. Real questions. What do you think about this? She'd say, holding up 2 different books. Which one should I keep? Or, does this schedule make sense to you, or am I overcomplicating it? Or, the new physical therapist seems competent, but something feels off. Am I being paranoid? These weren't tests. They were actual requests for his opinion, like she valued what he thought, like he wasn't just staff. It threw Dorian off balance at first. He'd spent 5 weeks learning to anticipate her needs, to move quietly through her space, to be useful without being intrusive. Now she was asking him to have opinions, to engage, to matter beyond just doing what he was told. One afternoon, while Dorian was fixing a loose hinge on one of the kitchen cabinets, something Caroline had mentioned in passing that needed attention, Lila wheeled in and watched him work for a moment. Can I ask you something? She said. Dorian looked up from the screwdriver. Sure. Why don't you ever complain? He blinked. About what? This, the job, me, the hours, any of it. Dorian set the screwdriver down and thought about it. Really thought about it. Because I've had worse, he said finally, and because complaining doesn't change anything. Most people complain anyway. I'm not most people. Lila's mouth twitched, almost a smile. You keep saying that. Because it keeps being true. This time she did smile. Small, but real. Do you resent being here? She asked. Instead of with your kids? The question hit harder than Dorian expected. He picked up the screwdriver again, focused on the hinge, buying himself a few seconds. Every day, he admitted. But I also know this is the best option I've got right now, so I'm going to do it well and try not to drown in guilt while I'm at it. That's very pragmatic. You've said that before. Because it keeps being true. Dorian almost laughed. Touché. Lila watched him finish tightening the hinge, then said, Do you think I'm spoiled? The question caught him off guard. He straightened up, meeting her eyes. No, he said. Why not? I live in a mansion. I have people who do everything for me. I've never had to worry about money or food or keeping the lights on. Because you didn't choose this, Dorian said simply. The accident, the wheelchair, the pain, none of that was a choice. And you're fighting like hell to get your life back. That's not spoiled, that's survival. Lila's expression softened in a way he'd never seen before. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For not treating me like I'm broken. Dorian held her gaze. You're not broken. You're just dealing with a shit hand. There's a difference. Is there? Yeah. Broken means unfixable. You're not unfixable. You're just in process. Lila smiled, and this time it reached her eyes. You're surprisingly optimistic for someone who's been through what you have. I'm not optimistic, Dorian corrected. I'm stubborn. There's a difference. Good, Lila said. I don't trust optimists. The rhythm they'd found, tentative as it was, lasted exactly 3 more days before Lila's father showed up and shattered it. Dorian was in the kitchen making lunch when he heard the front door open. Not the careful, announced opening of Caroline or a delivery person, but the confident, proprietary opening of someone who believed they owned the place. Because, technically, they did. Voices echoed from the foyer. Caroline's, clipped and professional, and a man's, deep and commanding, with the kind of tone that expected compliance. Where is she? Mr. Monroe, if you'd like to schedule a visit... I don't need to schedule anything. This is my house. Dorian set down the knife he'd been using to slice tomatoes and moved toward the hallway. The man standing in the entryway was in his early 60s, tall and broad-shouldered, with silver hair combed back from a face that looked like it had been carved from expensive granite. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Dorian's truck, and he carried himself with the kind of casual authority that came from never being told no. His eyes swept over Dorian with the brief, dismissive assessment of someone cataloging furniture. "Who are you?" he asked. "Dorian Blake. I work here." "Another assistant." The man's tone dripped with something between pity and contempt. "How long has this one lasted?" "5 weeks," Dorian said evenly. The man raised an eyebrow. "That's a record." Before Dorian could respond, Lila's voice cut through the hallway like a blade. "What are you doing here, Richard?" Her father turned, and his expression shifted into something that might have been concern if it hadn't been layered with condescension. "I came to check on you, sweetheart." "I didn't ask you to." "You never do." Richard walked toward her, hands in his pockets, relaxed and confident. "You look tired." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're isolated in this house, refusing proper care, wasting away when you could be getting real help." Lila's hands tightened on the armrests of her wheelchair. Dorian saw the white of her knuckles, saw the tension building in her shoulders. "This is my home," she said, voice hard. "This is my property," Richard corrected gently. Too gently. "And I'm starting to think it's doing more harm than good. You need professional care. A facility where—" "A facility?" Lila's voice rose, sharp and cutting. "You mean a place where you can forget I exist?" "Don't be dramatic. Don't be a coward." Richard's jaw tightened, just barely, but Dorian saw it. "I'm trying to help you, Lila." "No, you're trying to control me, like you always have." The air in the room felt electric. Dorian stayed where he was, near the kitchen doorway, watching. He'd learned enough about Lila in 5 weeks to know she wouldn't want him to interfere. Not yet, but he stayed ready anyway. Richard sighed, the sound heavy with manufactured patience. "You're being irrational. I'm being independent. You're being stubborn. There's a difference." "Good," Lila said coldly. "I learned from the best." Richard stared at her for a long moment. Then his gaze slid to Dorian, still standing near the kitchen. "How much is she paying you?" Richard asked. Dorian blinked. "Excuse me?" "To enable this. To let her pretend she's fine when she's clearly not. What's your cut?" I'm not enabling anything," Dorian said, keeping his voice level. "I'm helping her with what she needs." "What she needs is professional psychiatric care and a reality check, not another yes man telling her what she wants to hear." Dorian felt his jaw tighten. "With respect, Mr. Monroe, I don't think you know what she needs." Richard's eyes narrowed. "And you do? You've been here, what, 5 weeks?" "Long enough to see that she's capable of making her own decisions. She's in a wheelchair because she made a bad decision, driving home late at night from some dance rehearsal when she should have been home. If she'd listened to me—" "Richard," Lila's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Get out. Lila, get out." Richard stood there for another moment, then shook his head slowly. "You're going to burn through this one, too," he said, gesturing vaguely at Dorian. "Just like all the others. And when you do, don't call me." He turned and walked toward the door. Before he left, he looked back at Lila. "I'm giving you until the end of the month to reconsider. After that, I'm cutting off the trust fund. You want to be independent? Fine. Be independent without my money." The door closed behind him with a soft, final click. The silence that followed was suffocating. Lila sat perfectly still, staring at the spot where her father had been standing. Her face was pale. Her hands were shaking. Dorian waited. Caroline appeared from wherever she'd been hovering, her expression professionally neutral. "Miss Monroe, would you like—" "Leave me alone," Lila said quietly. Caroline hesitated, then nodded and disappeared. Dorian stayed where he was. After a long moment, Lila wheeled past him without a word and disappeared down the hallway toward her room. Dorian stood in the foyer, hands in his pockets, staring at nothing. He just watched a father threaten to financially abandon his disabled daughter because she refused to do what he wanted. and there wasn't a damn thing Dorian could do about it. An hour later, Dorian knocked on Lila's door. No answer. He knocked again. "Lila, it's me." Still nothing. He opened the door slowly. She was sitting by the window, wheelchair positioned so she could look out at the canyon. She didn't turn when he entered. "I said leave me alone," she said, her voice flat. "I know, but I'm not good at following orders." "Then you're in the wrong job." "Probably." Dorian walked over and sat on the edge of her bed, close enough to talk but far enough to give her space. "You don't have to talk," he said, "but I'm not leaving you alone right now." Lila was quiet for a long moment. Then, without looking at him, she said, He's going to do it. Cut me off. He always does what he says he's going to do. Then we'll figure it out." "We?" She finally looked at him, her eyes red-rimmed. "This isn't your problem, Dorian." "Maybe not, but I'm here anyway." "Why?" "Because you'd do the same for me." Lila let out a bitter laugh. "Would I?" "Yeah, you would." She stared at him, something shifting in her expression. "You don't even know me. I know enough. You know I'm difficult, controlling, that I push people away. Yeah. I also know you're fighting harder than anyone I've ever met, that you refuse to give up even when it would be easier, that you're stronger than you think you are." Dorian leaned forward slightly. "And I know your father's full of shit." That surprised a laugh out of her, a real one. "He's not wrong about everything," she said quietly. "I am stubborn. I do push people away. I did make a bad decision that night." "What happened?" Lila looked back out the window. For a moment, Dorian thought she wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "I was driving home from a rehearsal. Late. I should have stayed in the city, gotten a hotel, but I wanted to sleep in my own bed. I was tired, not paying attention. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit me head on." Her voice was eerily calm. "I don't remember the impact, just waking up in the hospital 3 days later and being told I'd probably never walk again." "I'm sorry." "Everyone's sorry. It doesn't change anything." "No, it doesn't." Lila was quiet for a long moment. Then, "My father visited me once, in the hospital. He looked at me lying there with pins in my spine and tubes everywhere, and you know what he said?" Dorian waited. "He said, 'This is what happens when you don't listen.'" The words hung in the air like poison. "Jesus," Dorian breathed. "He's not a bad person," Lila said, though her voice suggested she didn't quite believe it. He doesn't know how to deal with things he can't control. And I've never been someone he could control." "Good." She looked at him. "Good? Yeah, the world's got enough people willing to roll over. We need more people who fight back." "Even when it costs them everything?" "Especially then." Lila's throat worked. She looked like she was trying not to cry. "I don't know what I'm going to do," she admitted. "Without his money, I can't afford this place. I can't afford you. I can't afford physical therapy or medications or any of it." "Then we find something you can afford." "Like what? A one-bedroom apartment in a building without an elevator? A group home where they park me in front of a TV all day?" "If that's what it takes, yeah." Lila shook her head. "You don't understand. I built my entire life around dancing. And when I lost that, I told myself at least I had this." She gestured around the room, the house. "At least I had something. But if I lose this too..." She trailed off. Dorian moved to crouch beside her wheelchair so they were eye to eye. "Listen to me," he said. "You are not this house. You're not your father's money. You're not even your ability to walk. You're you. And that's enough." "It doesn't feel like enough." "I know, but it is." Lila looked at him, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to figure out if he was lying. "Why do you care so much?" she asked. Dorian thought about it, really thought about it. "Because someone has to," he said finally. "And because you gave me a chance when I was desperate. So now I'm returning the favor. That's not the same thing." "Close enough," Lila laughed, a small, broken sound, and wiped her eyes. "You're too good for this job," she said. "Nah, I'm exactly right for it." She smiled, just barely, but it was there. "Okay," she said quietly. We'll figure it out. Yeah, we will, Semchika. Over the next 2 weeks, they did exactly that. Caroline helped Lila go through the estate's finances with the precision of a forensic accountant. They identified what assets Lila actually owned versus what belonged to Richard's trust. The list was depressingly short. Most of the art, Richards. The car, Richards. The furniture, Richards. Even the house itself, technically Richards, though Lila had been living in it under the assumption it would eventually be hers. What Lila did have was a small trust fund her mother had set up before she died, separate from Richard's control. It wasn't much, about $3,000 a month, but it was something. That's not enough for this place, Caroline said, looking at the numbers. I know, Lila said. We could look for something smaller, more affordable. Where? Caroline pulled up a list on her tablet. There are accessible apartments in Culver City, Mid-Wilshire, some in Pasadena. Lila looked at the listings with an expression Dorian couldn't quite read. These are all so small. They're what you can afford. I know. Dorian, watching from across the room, said, Small isn't bad, it's just different. Lila glanced at him. Easy for you to say. You're not the one losing everything. No, but I've lived in small. It's manageable. Manageable, Lila repeated, like the word tasted bitter. Yeah, and it's yours. That counts for something. Lila stared at the listings for another moment, then nodded slowly. All right, let's look at them. Tachamut. They visited 3 apartments over the next week. The first one was in Culver City, ground floor, 2 bedrooms, accessible bathroom. It was clean, functional, and depressingly bland with beige carpet and white walls and windows that looked out onto a parking lot. It's fine, Lila said, her voice carefully neutral. You hate it, Dorian said. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Lila smiled faintly. It's just different. Different bad or different scary? She thought about it. Both. They looked at 2 more. One in Mid-Wilshire that had a broken elevator and a landlord who kept staring at Lila's wheelchair like it was a liability. One in Pasadena that was beautiful, but $1,500 over budget. By the end of the week, Lila was exhausted and frustrated and no closer to making a decision. I don't know what I'm doing, she admitted one night, sitting on the terrace with Dorian. I've never had to think about rent or budgets or any of this. It's a learning curve, Dorian said. But you'll figure it out. What if I can't? Then I'll help you. Lila looked at him. You won't be able to. If I can't afford this place, I can't afford you. The words sat heavy between them. Dorian had known this was coming, had been thinking about it for days. But hearing it out loud still hit different. I've been thinking about that, he said. And I can't keep working for you full time. Not if I want to be there for my kids. Lila's face went carefully blank. I understand. But, Dorian continued, I can work part-time, a few days a week, help you get settled, make sure you're okay. Dorian, you don't have to. I know, but I want to. Why? Because we're friends, and friends don't bail when things get hard. Lila's eyes filled with tears. We're friends? Yeah, I thought that was obvious. She laughed, wiping her face. Nothing about you is obvious. I'll take that as a compliment. It was. They sat in silence for a while, the night air cool and quiet. Then Lila said, If I do this, move, start over, all of it, I'm going to need help. I know. Not just with logistics, with everything. I know. And you're really okay with that? Dorian looked at her. Yeah, I am. Lila nodded slowly. Okay, then let's do it. They chose the apartment in Culver City. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't beautiful, but it was affordable, accessible, and most importantly, it was hers. The move happened on a Saturday. Dorian, Caroline, and a team of movers packed up the essentials. Lila's clothes, her books, the few pieces of furniture she actually owned, her medical equipment, and transported everything to the new place. Lila supervised from her wheelchair, directing traffic and making decisions about what stayed and what went. She was calm, focused, but Dorian could see the strain around her eyes, the tightness in her jaw. This was hard for her, harder than she'd admit. By late afternoon, the apartment was functional. Not decorated, not beautiful, but livable. Lila sat in the middle of the living room, surrounded by boxes, looking small and lost. "This is it," she said quietly. "This is the beginning," Dorian corrected. "It doesn't feel like a beginning. It feels like a downgrade." "It's freedom. That's not a downgrade." Lila looked up at him. "Is it? Or am I just lying to myself?" "You're not lying. You're scared. There's a difference." She nodded, but she didn't look convinced. Dorian stayed until everything was unpacked, until the bed was made and the kitchen was stocked, and the bathroom had towels and soap and everything she'd need. Then, as the sun started to set, he stood by the door. "You gonna be okay?" he asked. "I don't know," Lila said honestly, "but I guess I'll find out. I'll be back Wednesday. Call me if you need anything before then." "I will." Dorian hesitated, then said, "You're going to be fine, Lila. You keep saying that." "Because it keeps being true." She smiled, small, tired, but real. "Thank you, Dorian, for everything." "Don't thank me yet. I'm not done helping." "I know, but still, thank you." Dorian nodded, then turned to leave. "Dorian?" He looked back. "You saved my life," she said softly. "I hope you know that." "You saved mine too," he said, and then he left. Dorian drove straight to Hawthorne. When he pulled up outside his mother's duplex, it was almost dark. The porch light was on. Mia and Eli were visible through the front window, sitting at the kitchen table doing homework. He sat in the truck for a moment, just watching them. Then he got out and walked to the door. Eli saw him first. His face lit up like Christmas. "Dad!" He launched himself off the chair and sprinted to the door, yanking it open before Dorian could knock. "You're home!" Dorian crouched down and caught him as he crashed into his arms. "Yeah, bud. I'm home." Mia appeared in the doorway more slowly, cautious in the way she'd learned to be. "For how long?" "For good," Dorian said, pulling her into the hug too. "I'm not leaving again." "Really?" "Really." His mother appeared behind them, leaning against the doorframe. She looked thinner than the last time he'd seen her, frailer, but she was smiling. "About time," Celeste said. Dorian stood, keeping one hand on each of his kids' shoulders. "Yeah, it is." They went inside, and for the first time in months, Dorian felt like he could breathe. The first week back felt like learning to walk again after months of floating. Dorian got a job at a repair shop in Torrance, Garcia and Sons Auto, run by a man in his 60s who didn't ask too many questions and paid cash under the table when Dorian explained his situation. The money wasn't great, $40 an hour when there was work, but it was close to home and the hours were flexible enough that he could pick the kids up from school. He enrolled Mia and Eli in an after-school program at the YMCA, got them on a schedule, made dinner every night, nothing fancy, just pasta or chicken or whatever he could throw together on a budget, and helped with homework and put them to bed at a reasonable hour. It felt normal, almost. But every Wednesday and Saturday, he drove to Culver City and spent the day with Lila. Sometimes they worked on her physical therapy exercises. Sometimes they just talked. Sometimes Dorian fixed things around her apartment, a leaky faucet, a loose cabinet door, a window that wouldn't close all the way, while Lila worked at her desk, managing the logistics of her life with the same meticulous focus she'd once applied to dance. She was adapting, slowly, but she was doing it. One Wednesday afternoon, about 3 weeks after she'd moved in, Dorian found her sitting on her small balcony, staring out at the street below. She had a notebook in her lap, filled with handwriting he couldn't read from where he stood. "What's that?" he asked, stepping outside. She glanced up. "Ideas." "For what?" "I don't know yet. That's the problem." Dorian pulled up the cheap plastic chair she'd bought from Target and sat down. "Talk me through it." Lila hesitated, then flipped the notebook closed. Do you know what the worst part of all this is? Not the wheelchair, not the pain, not even losing the estate. What is it? Not knowing what I'm supposed to do now. Her voice was quiet, almost fragile. I spent 20 years knowing exactly who I was and where I was going. I was a dancer. That was my identity, my purpose. And when that got taken away, I told myself I'd get it back. I'd work hard enough, fight hard enough, and eventually I'd dance again. She paused. But I'm starting to realize that's not going to happen. Maybe not the way it was before, Dorian said carefully, but that doesn't mean it's over, doesn't it? No, it just means it looks different now. Lila was quiet for a long moment, her fingers tracing the edge of the notebook. I've been thinking about that, about what comes next, and I keep coming back to the same idea, which is helping people, people like me, people who've lost something and don't know how to move forward. Dorian leaned forward. Like a support group? Bossum opis. More than that, a program, something that combines physical rehabilitation with emotional support, therapy, community. She opened the notebook again, showing him pages of notes and sketches and half-formed plans. I've been talking to Dr. Vance about it. She thinks it could work. Dr. Vance is in? She's interested. She said if I can figure out the logistics, she'd help me build the curriculum. Dorian looked at the notes, at the careful way Lila had outlined different phases of recovery, different types of support people might need. It was thorough, thoughtful, and completely her. This is good, he said. You think so? Yeah, I do, but it's going to be a lot of work. I know. That's the part that scares me. Why? Because what if I fail? What if I put all this effort into building something and it doesn't work? Dorian met her eyes. Then you'll have tried. That's more than most people do. Lila smiled faintly. You keep saying things like that because they keep being true. You're annoyingly consistent, you know that? I've been told. Lila laughed, and the sound was lighter than it had been in weeks. All right, I'll try, but I'm going to need help. I'm already here twice a week. What else do you need? Your perspective. You've rebuilt your life from nothing more than once. You understand what it's like to start over when you don't have a choice. Dorian thought about it, about the months after he'd lost his job, the eviction notice, the desperate scramble to keep his kids fed and his mother alive, the way he'd felt like he was drowning every single day until Lila had thrown him a lifeline he hadn't even known he needed. Yeah, he said. I'll help. Lila's expression softened. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Let's see if this thing actually works first. Building the program took months. Lila threw herself into it with the same intensity she'd once brought to dance. She researched grants, reached out to hospitals and rehabilitation centers, built a network of therapists and volunteers who believed in what she was trying to do. Dorian helped where he could. He wasn't good at the bureaucratic stuff, the paperwork and applications and endless phone calls, but he was good at the practical things. Finding a location, setting up the space, making sure the building was accessible, fixing things when they broke. They found a small community center in Mar Vista that was willing to rent them space 3 days a week. It wasn't much. 2 rooms, a shared bathroom, fluorescent lights that flickered, but it was affordable and it was theirs. Dr. Vance came on board officially, bringing 2 other therapists with her. They built a curriculum that focused on holistic recovery. Physical therapy, yes, but also mental health support, community building, and practical skills for navigating life after trauma. Lila named it Second Steps. Because everyone deserves a second chance to find their footing, she explained when Dorian asked about the name. They launched in early March with 8 participants. The first session was chaos. One woman, Grace, mid-40s, recovering from a stroke, broke down crying halfway through and had to leave. A man in his 30s, Marcus, car accident, partial paralysis, got into an argument with one of the therapists about whether the exercises were even worth doing. Another participant didn't show up at all. By the end of the day, Lila looked exhausted and defeated. That was a disaster, she said, slumped in her wheelchair in the empty community center. Dorian was putting away equipment, stacking mats in the corner. It was the first day. First days are always rough. Grace left. Marcus thinks this is a waste of time, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Yeah, you do. You're just scared it won't work. Lila looked at him, her expression raw. What if it doesn't? Then we adjust and try again. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's doable. Lila was quiet for a moment, then let out a long breath. Okay, we'll try again. Yeah, we will. They did. The second session was better. Grace came back, apologizing for leaving and explaining that she'd been overwhelmed. Marcus still argued, but he stayed for the whole session. 2 new participants joined, both eager and hopeful in a way that reminded Dorian of Lila when she'd first started therapy. By the end of the month, they had 12 regular participants. By the end of the second month, they had 20. Word was spreading. People were talking about second steps. About the woman in the wheelchair who'd built something real out of her own pain. About the program that actually worked. Lila started to believe it might actually succeed. But success brought its own problems. The community center was too small. They needed more space, more equipment, more staff. Lila applied for grants and got rejected by half a dozen organizations before finally landing a small one from a local nonprofit. It wasn't enough to expand, but it was enough to keep going. Dorian watched her work herself to exhaustion, and it reminded him too much of the way she'd been at the estate, pushing too hard, refusing to rest, running herself into the ground because she didn't know how to stop. One Saturday evening, after a particularly long day at the center, Dorian found her in the tiny office she'd set up in the corner of the space, staring at her laptop with bloodshot eyes. "You need to go home," he said. "I'm almost done." "You've been saying that for 3 hours. I'm serious, I just need to finish this grant application and then—" Dorian reached over and closed the laptop. Lila glared at him. "What are you doing?" "Stopping you from burning out again." "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You look like you haven't slept in a week." "I've been busy. Too busy. You're doing it again, Lila. Pushing yourself until you break. I don't have a choice. If I don't do this, who will?" "Me. Dr. Vance. The other volunteers. You don't have to carry all of this yourself." Lila's jaw tightened. "Yes, I do. This is my program. My responsibility." "It's our program," Dorian corrected. "And if you collapse again, it won't matter whose responsibility it is because it'll fall apart anyway." Lila stared at him, her expression wavering between anger and something that looked like fear. "I don't know how to stop." "Then I'll teach you." "Dorian?" "Lila." His voice was firm but gentle. "You can't pour from an empty cup. You taught me that. Now let me return the favor." Her shoulders sagged, just slightly. "But enough." "Okay," she said quietly. "What do I do?" "First, you go home. You eat something that isn't coffee and stress. You sleep for more than 4 hours. And tomorrow, you let other people help." "That's it?" "That's the start." Lila nodded slowly, then stood from her wheelchair, something she'd been practicing for months and could now do for short periods, and grabbed her bag. "Thank you," she said. "Don't thank me. Just do it." She smiled faintly. "You're bossy when you want to be." "I learned from the best." Fuck. Things shifted again after that. Lila started delegating, started trusting other people to handle pieces of the program she'd been trying to manage alone. Dr. Vance took over curriculum development. One of the volunteers, a woman named Sandra, who had a background in nonprofit management, took over grant writing and fundraising, and Lila focused on what she was actually good at, connecting with participants, understanding their pain, helping them see a way forward. The program grew. By the 6th month, they'd moved into a larger space in Culver City. By the 9th month, they had 50 regular participants and a waiting list. By the end of the first year, they'd secured enough funding to hire 2 full-time staff members and expand to 5 days a week. Second Steps wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. And so was Lila. She still had bad days, days when the pain was overwhelming and she couldn't get out of bed, days when she doubted everything and wanted to quit. But those days were fewer now, and when they came, she had people around her who understood, who didn't judge, who just helped her get through it. Dorian was there every Wednesday and Saturday without fail. Sometimes he led group sessions, sharing his own story when it felt right. Sometimes he just helped with logistics, fixing equipment, organizing files, making sure things ran smoothly. But mostly, he was just there. A constant. A reminder that she wasn't alone. One Wednesday afternoon, about 14 months after they'd launched, Lila found Dorian in the equipment room, repairing a broken resistance band with duct tape and determination. "That's not going to hold," she said, wheeling up beside him. "It'll hold long enough for us to order a new one. We have a budget for equipment now. You don't have to MacGyver everything." Dorian grinned. Old habits. Lila watched him work for a moment, then said, "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Do you ever regret it, taking the job with me in the first place?" Dorian set down the duct tape and looked at her. Really looked. "No," he said. "Not even a little bit." "Why not? You gave up months with your kids. You worked for a woman who treated you like garbage half the time. You could have found something easier." "Easier doesn't mean better. And yeah, I gave up time with my kids. But I also gave them stability, a future. And I found something I didn't know I needed. Which is purpose, connection, a reason to believe things could get better." He paused. "You gave me that, Lila, whether you realize it or not." Lila's eyes glistened. "I feel the same way about you." "Then I'd say we're even." She smiled, but there was something else in her expression, something uncertain. "What?" Dorian asked. "I've been thinking about something," she said slowly, "and I don't know if it's a good idea or a terrible one. Tell me anyway. I want to expand the program, really expand it. Multiple locations across the county, partnerships with hospitals, a full-time staff, the whole thing." Dorian raised an eyebrow. "That's ambitious." "I know, but I think we could do it. I think there's a real need for this, and if we don't step up, no one else will." "Okay, so what's stopping you?" Lila hesitated. "It would mean going full-time, quitting the part-time consulting work I've been doing to pay rent, putting everything into this." "That scares you. Terrifies me." "Why?" "Because what if I fail? What if I put everything into this and it falls apart?" Dorian leaned back against the wall, crossing his arms. "You know what I've learned in the last year and a half?" "What?" "That failure is only permanent if you let it be. You fall down, you get back up. You try something and it doesn't work, you try something else. The only real failure is not trying at all." Lila smiled. "When did you get so wise?" "I'm not wise. I'm just stubborn and too dumb to know when to quit." "Too," she laughed. "I think you're selling yourself short." "Maybe. But I'm also right. You should do this. Go all in. Build something that matters. And if it doesn't work, then at least you'll know you tried. And honestly, I think it will work." Lila held his gaze for a long moment, something shifting in her expression. "Will you help me? I'm already here twice a week. What more do you need?" "More than that, I need you full-time. As operations director, someone who can manage the logistics and keep me from drowning in details." Dorian blinked. "Lila, I can't afford to quit my job. I can pay you. Not much at first, but more than you're making at the shop. And as we grow, it'll get better." "What about my kids?" "Bring them. We'll have after-school hours soon anyway. They can do homework here. Eli can run around in the gym. It'll work." Dorian stared at her, his mind racing. This was insane. Leaving a stable job, however low-paying, to work for a nonprofit that was barely a year old, betting on something that could fail. But it was also exactly what he'd been doing when he'd taken the job at the estate. Betting on something uncertain because the alternative was worse. And this time, he wouldn't be doing it alone. "All right," he said. "I'm in." Lila's face lit up. "Really?" "Yeah, really." She reached out and Dorian took her hand. "We're going to build something incredible," she said. "Yeah," Dorian agreed. "We are." But before they could move forward, the past came back. Dorian got the call on a Tuesday night, 3 weeks after he'd agreed to join Second Steps full time. It was Mia, her voice small and scared in a way that made his blood run cold. "Dad, Grandma fell. She's not waking up." Dorian was in his truck and on the road in under a minute. He called 911 while he drove, his hands shaking on the steering wheel, his mind running through every worst-case scenario. By the time he got to the duplex, the ambulance was already there. Paramedics were loading his mother onto a stretcher while Mia and Eli stood on the porch, holding hands, looking small and terrified. Dorian ran to them, pulled them both into his arms. "Are you okay?" Mia nodded. "She was making dinner and she just collapsed. I called 911 like you taught me." "You did good, sweetheart. You did so good." Eli was crying. "Is Grandma going to die?" Dorian's throat tightened. "I don't know, bud, but the paramedics are helping her." One of the EMTs walked over. "Are you family? I'm her son. We're taking her to County General. You should follow us." Dorian nodded, then looked at his kids. "Go pack a bag. You're coming with me." They spent the night in the hospital waiting room. Mia did her homework under the fluorescent lights. Eli fell asleep curled up on 2 chairs pushed together. Dorian sat with his elbows on his knees and his head in his hands, waiting for someone to tell him if his mother was going to live or die. A doctor finally appeared around 3 in the morning. "Mr. Blake?" Dorian stood. "Yeah. Your mother had a seizure. We've stabilized her, but her condition is critical. The cancer has progressed significantly." Dorian felt the floor tilt beneath him. "How long?" The doctor's expression was kind but unflinching. "It's hard to say. Weeks. Maybe a month." The words hit him like a physical blow. "Can I see her?" "Of course." Celeste was awake when Dorian entered the room. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, her skin the color of old parchment, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped steadily in the quiet. "Hey, baby," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Hey, Mom." "I'm sorry." "Don't apologize. This isn't your fault. I should have told you it was getting worse." "You don't have to protect me." Celeste smiled faintly. "I'm your mother. That's my job." Dorian sat beside the bed, taking her hand. It felt fragile, like bird bones. "What do you need?" he asked. "I need you to promise me something. Anything. Take care of those kids, and don't let guilt eat you alive. You spent your whole life carrying other people's weight, Dorian. It's time to put some of it down." "Mom, I mean it. You're a good man, a good father, and you deserve to be happy. Promise me you won't forget that." Dorian's throat was so tight he could barely breathe. "I promise." "Good." Celeste closed her eyes, exhausted. "Now go home, get some sleep. I'll still be here tomorrow." But she wasn't. Celeste Blake passed away 3 days later, surrounded by machines and silence, with Dorian holding her hand. The funeral was small, just family and a few neighbors who'd known Celeste for years. The pastor said things about peace and rest and reunions in a better place, and Dorian sat between his kids and felt nothing but a vast, empty ache. Lila came. She sat in the back, quiet and respectful, and when it was over, she found Dorian outside. "I'm sorry," she said. Dorian nodded. He didn't trust himself to speak. "If you need time, I need to work," Dorian interrupted. "I need to do something that matters." Lila studied his face, then nodded. "Okay, whenever you're ready." "I'm ready now." "Dorian?" "Lila, please, I need this." She hesitated, then reached out and squeezed his hand. "Okay, but if it gets to be too much, you tell me." "I will." He wouldn't, but she didn't need to know that. Work became Dorian's lifeline. He threw himself into Second Steps with the same desperate intensity he'd once brought to keeping his family afloat. He worked 12-hour days, managing logistics and coordinating staff and fixing things that broke. He barely slept, barely ate, just kept moving because stopping meant feeling, and feeling meant drowning. Lila noticed. Of course she noticed. "You're doing it again," she said one evening. finding him in the office long after everyone else had gone home. Doing what? Punishing yourself. Dorian looked up from the spreadsheet he'd been staring at for the last hour without actually seeing. I'm working. You're hiding. I'm fine. No, you're not. Lila wheeled closer, her expression gentle but firm. Your mother just died, Dorian. You're allowed to grieve. I don't have time to grieve. You don't have time not to. Dorian's hands clenched into fists. If I stop, Lila, if I let myself feel it, I don't know if I'll be able to start again. Then don't stop completely. Just slow down. Let people help you. I don't know how. Lila reached out, resting her hand on his. Then let me show you. And she did. Over the next few weeks, Lila made sure Dorian actually went home at reasonable hours, made sure he ate, made sure he spent time with his kids instead of just existing in the same space as them. She didn't fix him. She couldn't. But she kept him from falling apart completely. And slowly, very slowly, Dorian started to heal. Not because the pain went away. It didn't. It probably never would. But because he learned that he didn't have to carry it alone. 3 months after his mother's funeral, Dorian woke up one morning and realized he'd made it through an entire night without dreaming about her. The guilt hit him before he'd even gotten out of bed. Like forgetting was a betrayal. Like moving forward meant leaving her behind. He lay there staring at the ceiling of his small bedroom in Inglewood, listening to Mia and Eli arguing in the kitchen about whose turn it was to feed the cat they'd adopted 2 weeks ago, a scraggly orange thing that had shown up on the porch and refused to leave, and felt the familiar weight of grief settle over him like a blanket. But beneath it, for the first time, was something else. Not happiness. Not yet. But maybe the possibility of it. He got up, made breakfast, drove the kids to school, and went to work at Second Steps like he did every day now. The commute from Inglewood to Culver City took 40 minutes in traffic, which gave him time to think. Time to notice that the knot in his chest had loosened just slightly. That breathing didn't hurt quite as much as it used to. When he arrived, Lila was already there, sitting at her desk in the corner office they'd set up 3 months ago when they'd moved into the expanded space. She'd been walking more lately, short distances, with a cane, but still walking, and Dorian had watched her transformation over the past year and a half with something close to awe. She looked up when he walked in. You're late. Traffic. Liar. You're never late. Dorian set his bag down. Fine. I sat in the parking lot for 10 minutes trying to convince myself to come inside. Lila's expression softened. Bad morning? Not bad, just heavy. Want to talk about it? Not really. Okay. She turned back to her computer, giving him space without making him feel abandoned. That was something Dorian had learned about Lila over the past year. She knew when to push and when to let things be. Dr. Vance wants to talk to you about the new intake process, and Marcus is asking if you can lead the afternoon session because he wants to share his story, and he only trusts you to moderate. Marcus finally wants to talk? Apparently. He said, and I quote, that Blake guy doesn't take any shit, so I figure he won't let me wuss out halfway through. Dorian smiled despite himself. High praise. From Marcus? It's practically a declaration of love. They fell into the rhythm of work. There was always something that needed attention, emails to answer, equipment to maintain, participants to check in with, funding applications to complete. The program had grown beyond anything either of them had imagined. They now had 3 locations across the county, over 100 active participants, and a staff of 15 people, including therapists, trainers, and administrative support. It was exhausting, rewarding, and sometimes overwhelming, but it was also working. Around midday, Dorian found Lila in the therapy room, watching one of the new participants, a woman named Teresa, early 60s, recovering from a spinal injury, work through an exercise with one of the physical therapists. Lila's expression was focused, analytical, taking mental notes. She's doing well, Dorian said, coming to stand beside her. She is, but she's compensating with her right side. See how her shoulder's hiking up? She's probably in pain and not saying anything. Dorian watched for a moment. You want me to talk to her? No, I will, after the session. Lila glanced at him. You notice things most people miss. So do you. I notice the physical stuff. You notice the emotional stuff. The things people don't say. Dorian shrugged. Comes from having a mother who never admitted when she was hurting. Lila's expression shifted, sympathy flickering across her face. How are you doing with all that? Some days are better than others. And today? Today's okay. Just okay. Dorian thought about the dream, or lack of it, and the guilt that had followed. I'm afraid I'm forgetting her. Lila was quiet for a moment, then, You're not forgetting her. You're just learning to live without her. There's a difference. Doesn't feel different? I know, but it is. She paused. My mother died when I was 19, car accident, and for the first year after, I felt guilty every time I laughed, every time I had a good day, like I was dishonoring her memory by not being miserable. Dorian looked at her. She'd never mentioned her mother before. What changed? He asked. I realized that she wouldn't have wanted me to suffer, that the best way to honor her was to live, really live, not just exist. And you think my mom would want the same thing? I never met her, but from everything you've told me about her, yeah, I think she'd want you to be happy. Dorian nodded slowly. The knot in his chest loosened a little more. Thank you, he said. For what? For getting it. Lila smiled. You've done the same for me more times than I can count. Consider us even. The afternoon session with Marcus was intense. Marcus was 34, a former construction worker who'd been paralyzed from the waist down in a scaffolding accident 3 years ago. He'd been angry when he'd first joined the program 6 months back, angry at the world, at his body, at everyone around him. He'd argued with therapists, snapped at other participants, and generally made himself difficult to be around. But he'd also kept showing up. And slowly, the anger had started to crack, revealing something raw underneath. Now, sitting in a circle with 8 other participants and Dorian moderating, Marcus cleared his throat and said, I guess I'm supposed to talk about my feelings or some shit. A few people laughed, nervous, but genuine. You don't have to, Dorian said. But if you want to, we're listening. Marcus looked down at his hands. Big hands, scarred and calloused from years of hard labor. Hands that used to build things and now mostly just grip the wheels of his chair. I was supposed to get married, he said quietly. 3 weeks after the accident, had the venue booked, the flowers ordered, the whole deal. And when I woke up in the hospital and they told me I'd never walk again, the first thing I thought was, she's going to leave. The room was silent. And she did. Not right away. She stuck around for a few months, tried to make it work, but I could see it in her eyes every time she looked at me. I wasn't the guy she fell in love with anymore. I was this. He gestured at the wheelchair. So I pushed her away before she could leave on her own. Told her I didn't need her. Told her to go find someone whole. And did she? Someone asked. Marcus nodded. Married some accountant a year later. Has a kid now. I saw the pictures on Facebook. How'd that make you feel? Dorian asked gently. Like I made the right choice. Like at least she got to be happy, even if I didn't. You think you don't deserve to be happy? Marcus looked up, his eyes red. I don't know what I deserve anymore. I just know I'm tired of being angry all the time, tired of hating everyone, including myself, and I don't know how to stop. Dorian leaned forward. You're here. That's how you stop, one day at a time, one choice at a time. You keep showing up until the anger gets smaller and the other stuff, the hope, the possibility, gets bigger. And if it doesn't, then you keep showing up anyway. Marcus laughed, bitter but not entirely hopeless. You make it sound so simple. It's not simple, but it's doable. I've seen it happen. Hell, I've lived it. One of the other participants, a woman named Angela, spoke up. When did it get easier for you? Dorian thought about it. About the months of desperation and grief and barely holding it together. About the moment he'd realized he wasn't drowning anymore, just treading water. About the slow, painful climb back to something resembling solid ground. It didn't get easier, he said honestly. It got different. I stopped waiting for things to go back to how they were and started figuring out how to build something new. That's when it shifted. Angela nodded slowly. Marcus wiped his eyes. The room felt heavy with shared understanding. After the session ended and people started filtering out, Marcus wheeled over to Dorian. "Thanks," he said. "For what?" "For not bullshitting me. Everyone else wants to tell me it's all going to be fine. You just tell me the truth. The truth's more useful." "Yeah, it is." Marcus hesitated. "You ever think about going back to the way things were before?" "Every day." "But you don't." "Can't go back. Only forward." Marcus nodded. "Forward. All right, I can do that." "Yeah, you can." That evening, Dorian picked up Mia and Eli from the after-school program at Second Steps, something they'd implemented 4 months ago specifically so staff with kids could bring them to work, and drove home through rush hour traffic. Mia was quiet in the passenger seat, staring out the window with her earbuds in. Eli was in the back, talking nonstop about a science experiment they'd done in class involving vinegar and baking soda and something that had apparently exploded in a very satisfying way. Dorian let Eli's chatter wash over him, only half listening, his mind still on Marcus and the session and the weight of other people's pain that he carried home with him most days. "Dad?" Mia's voice cut through his thoughts. He glanced over. She'd taken out one earbud. "Yeah? Are you happy?" The question caught him off guard. "What?" "Are you happy, like, now, with your life?" Dorian thought about it, really thought about it. Was he happy? He was tired, overworked, still grieving his mother, still struggling to make ends meet even with the salary from Second Steps, still worried about his kids and whether he was screwing them up by not being around enough or being around too much, or just generally failing at single parenthood. But he also had work that mattered, people who relied on him, a purpose beyond just survival. "I don't know if happy is the right word," he said finally, "but I'm okay. Most days, I'm okay." "That's good," Mia said quietly. "Why do you ask?" She shrugged. "You seem different lately. Less sad." Dorian felt something tighten in his chest. "I'm sorry if I've been—" "Don't apologize," Mia interrupted. "I'm glad you're less sad. You deserve to be less sad." "So do you, sweetheart." "I know. And I am, mostly." She put the earbud back in, ending the conversation, but not before Dorian caught the small smile on her face. He drove the rest of the way home feeling lighter than he had in months. 2 weeks later, Lila asked Dorian to stay after work. Everyone else had gone home. The building was quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of traffic outside. "What's up?" Dorian asked, leaning against the door frame of her office. Lila looked up from her computer. "I need to tell you something." "Okay. Sit down first." Dorian sat, his stomach twisted. "You're not firing me, are you?" "What? No. Why would I fire you?" "I don't know. You're being weird." Lila smiled faintly. "I'm always weird." "Weirder than usual, then." She took a breath, then said, "I got a call from my father yesterday." Dorian's expression darkened. What did he want? To apologize. That was not what Dorian had expected. For what? Everything, cutting me off, trying to control me. The things he said after the accident. Lila's voice was carefully neutral. He said he's been following the program, saw the news coverage, read about what we're doing, and he's, proud. Proud. His words, not mine. Dorian crossed his arms. And what did you say? I told him thank you and hung up. That's it? What else was I supposed to say? Lila looked frustrated, uncertain. He spent 2 years making me feel like I was incapable of managing my own life. And now he wants credit for me proving him wrong? He doesn't deserve credit. I know, but part of me... She stopped, started again. Part of me wants to believe he means it, that he actually regrets what he did. Do you think he does? I don't know, maybe. Or maybe he just doesn't like how it looks that his disabled daughter is thriving without his help. Dorian thought about Richard Monroe, about the way he'd walked into Lila's life with ownership and walked out with threats. about the damage he'd done and the control he'd tried to maintain. What do you want to do? Dorian asked. I don't know. That's why I'm asking you, Chasta. You don't need my permission to talk to your father. I know, but I value your opinion. Dorian leaned back in the chair. All right, here's my opinion. Your father is a manipulative asshole who tried to break you when you refused to be controlled. But he's also your father. And if you think there's a chance, even a small one, that he's genuinely trying to make amends, maybe it's worth hearing him out. And if he's not, then you walk away. And you don't give him another chance. Lila nodded slowly. That's fair. But Lila... Yeah? Don't let him back into your life because you want his approval. Do it because you want a relationship with him. There's a difference. She smiled, small and sad. When did you get so wise about family dynamics? When I spent 6 months watching my mother die and wishing I'd said more, done more, been more. Dorian's voice was quiet. I don't want you to have those regrets. Lila reached across the desk, taking his hand. Thank you. For what? For always telling me the truth, even when it's hard. Someone has to. I'm glad it's you. They sat like that for a moment, hands linked across the desk, the weight of shared history and hard-won trust settling between them like something solid. Then Lila said, Can I ask you something else? Sure. Do you ever think about the future, like what happens 5 years from now, 10? Dorian thought about it. Sometimes. Why? Because I do, all the time, and every version of the future I imagine has you in it. Dorian's heart stuttered. Lila, I'm not saying this to make things weird, she interrupted quickly. I need you to know that you're not just my employee or my friend. She stopped, took a breath. You're the person I trust most in the world, and I don't know what I'd do without you. Dorian stared at her, his chest tight with something he couldn't quite name. I feel the same way, he said. You do? Yeah, you saved my life, Lila. More than once, and I'm not going anywhere. She smiled, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Good, because I need you. I know, and that's okay. They sat in silence for another moment. Then Lila cleared her throat and pulled her hand back, suddenly businesslike. All right, enough emotional honesty for one day. Go home. Your kids are probably waiting. Dorian stood. You going to be okay? Yeah, I'm going to call my father tomorrow. Set up a meeting. See what happens. And if it goes badly, then I'll call you and you'll tell me I'm not an idiot for trying. Deal. The meeting with Richard happened 2 weeks later. Lila asked Dorian to come with her. Not inside, she wanted to face her father alone, but nearby, just in case. They met at a restaurant in Santa Monica, neutral territory. Expensive but not ostentatious, the kind of place where people had quiet, important conversations over overpriced salads. Dorian sat in his truck in the parking lot, reading emails on his phone and glancing at the entrance every few minutes. Lila had been inside for 40 minutes. He had no idea if that was a good sign or a bad one. Finally, the door opened and Lila emerged, moving slowly with her cane, her expression unreadable. Dorian got out of the truck and met her halfway. How'd it go? He asked. He cried. Your father cried? Yeah, real tears and everything. Lila looked dazed. He said he was sorry, that he'd been wrong, that he'd let his fear control him and he'd hurt me in the process. Do you believe him? I don't know. Maybe. She paused. He wants to help. With the program. Financially. He said he has connections, access to funding we'd never get on our own. Dorian's jaw tightened. And what do you want to do? I want to say no. I want to tell him we don't need his help, that we've built this without him, and we'll keep building without him. But we do need help. We're maxed out on grants and donations. If we want to expand, really expand, we need more funding. So take his money. Just don't give him control. Lila looked at him. You think I should? I think you should do whatever feels right. But if you do take it, make sure it comes with clear boundaries. No strings, no expectations. just support. And if you can't do that, then you walk away. Lila nodded slowly. Okay, I'll think about it. They stood in the parking lot for another moment, the ocean breeze cool and salt-tinged. Thank you for being here, Lila said. Where else would I be? She smiled. Nowhere, apparently. You're learning. A month later, Second Steps announced a major expansion. 3 new locations across Southern California, a partnership with 5 hospitals, a scholarship fund for participants who couldn't afford fees, and a new advisory board that included Dr. Vance, 2 hospital administrators, and after much negotiation and very clear boundaries, Richard Monroe. The announcement made local news, then regional news, then a feature in a national magazine about innovative rehabilitation programs. Lila did interviews, Dorian managed the logistics. The program grew faster than either of them could have anticipated. And somewhere in the chaos, something shifted between them. It wasn't dramatic, wasn't a single moment, just a slow accumulation of shared glances and late-night conversations, and the realization that they'd built something together that neither of them wanted to walk away from. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of back-to-back meetings, Lila found Dorian in the parking lot, leaning against his truck and staring at nothing. You okay? She asked. Yeah, just tired. Same. She wheeled over beside him. We did it, you know. Did what? Built something that matters, something real. Dorian smiled. Yeah, we did. I couldn't have done it without you. Sure you could have. It just would have taken longer. Lila laughed. Always so humble. It's part of my charm. Is it? You tell me. She looked at him, her expression soft and open in a way it rarely was. Yeah, it is. They stood there in comfortable silence, the evening air warm and still. Then Lila said, Dorian, yeah? I think I'm in love with you. The words hung in the air between them. Dorian turned to face her fully, his heart pounding. You think? Okay, I know, I'm in love with you, I have been for a while, and I needed you to know. Dorian stared at her, everything inside him screaming that this was a terrible idea, that he was her employee, that it would complicate everything, that he had 2 kids and a life that was barely held together with duct tape and determination. But he also knew that she was right. I love you too, he said. Lila's face broke into the most genuine smile he'd ever seen from her. Yeah? Yeah. So what do we do now? Dorian thought about it, about all the ways this could go wrong, about all the reasons it probably would, and then he thought about everything they'd already survived, everything they'd built, everything they'd become. We figure it out, he said, same way we've figured out everything else. Together? Together. Lila reached out, and Dorian took her hand, and for the first time in longer than he could remember, the future didn't feel terrifying. It felt possible. They didn't tell anyone at first. Not because they were hiding it, exactly, but because it felt too new, too fragile to expose to scrutiny. They kept working side by side at Second Steps, kept showing up for participants and staff meetings and grant applications. And if they held hands in the parking lot when no one was looking or stayed up too late talking on the phone about nothing and everything, well, that was nobody's business but theirs. But Mia noticed. Of course she did. Mia noticed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after the parking lot conversation. Dorian had brought the kids to the Culver City location because he needed to fix a broken door handle and didn't want to leave them home alone. Eli was in the gym with a foam ball, bouncing it off the walls with the kind of chaotic energy that only 6-year-olds possessed. Mia was sitting at one of the tables doing homework. Lila had stopped by to drop off some files, and she and Dorian were in the office, standing close together while they talked about the upcoming expansion timeline. Nothing inappropriate, just proximity, comfort. When Dorian walked back out to check on the kids, Mia was watching him with an expression he couldn't quite read. What? He asked. You like her. Dorian blinked. Who? Miss Monroe. You like her. He stopped. Considered lying. Decided against it. Yeah, I do. Mia studied him for a long moment. Like her? Yeah. Does she like you back? I think so. Good. Mia went back to her homework like that settled it. Dorian stood there, thrown. That's it? You're not going to ask a million questions or tell me it's weird or… Dad. Mia looked up, patient in the way only old souls trapped in kid bodies could be. You've been sad for a really long time, and when you're with her, you're less sad. So yeah, I think it's good. Dorian felt his throat tighten. You're too smart for your own good, you know that? Grandma used to say the same thing. Yeah, she did. Mia smiled, small and knowing, then returned to her math problems. Dorian walked back to the office where Lila was still organizing files and closed the door behind him. Mia knows, he said. Lila looked up. Knows what? About us. She asked me if I like you. And what did you say? I said yes. Lila's expression softened. How'd she take it? Well, she said it's good because I'm less sad when I'm with you. She's not wrong. No, she's not. Dorian leaned against the desk. We should probably tell people, officially. Are you ready for that? Are you? Lila thought about it. I don't want it to change things at work. People already talk. If they think I'm showing you favoritism or that you're here because we're together, then we make it clear that's not the case. We keep work professional. We keep boundaries. And we don't let anyone else define what this is. Lila nodded slowly. Okay, let's do it. Met. They told the staff the following Monday at the regular team meeting. Caroline's eyebrows went up, but she didn't look surprised. Dr. Vance smiled like she'd been waiting for this announcement for months. Sandra, the nonprofit manager, just said, "Finally," and moved on to the next agenda item. Marcus cornered Dorian after the meeting. So you're dating the boss? Yeah. That doesn't seem like a great idea. Probably not. But you're doing it anyway. Yeah, Marcus grinned. Good for you, man. She's terrifying, but in a good way. I'll let her know you said that. Please don't. The thing was, it didn't change much. They still worked together, still argued about budgets and schedules and the best way to structure intake processes, still challenged each other and pushed back when they disagreed. But now, at the end of hard days, Dorian could kiss her goodnight in the parking lot, could tell her he loved her without it feeling like a confession, could build a future with her that included more than just work. It wasn't perfect. Nothing ever was. Lila still had bad pain days where she couldn't get out of bed, where she snapped at everyone and hated herself for needing help. Dorian still struggled with guilt about his mother, about his kids, about every decision he'd ever made that felt like choosing one person over another. But they figured it out, together. 4 months later, Richard Monroe showed up at the Culver City location unannounced. Dorian was in the gym running an equipment check when Caroline found him. Mr. Monroe is here to see his daughter. Dorian's jaw tightened. Did she know he was coming? No? Where is she? Office. Dorian headed that way, arriving just as Richard was knocking on Lila's door. He'd aged in the 2 years since Dorian had last seen him, more gray in his hair, deeper lines around his eyes, but he still carried himself with that same easy authority. Richard glanced at Dorian, recognition flickering across his face. You're still here. Yeah, I am. Surprising. Why? Because my daughter tends to burn through people. She didn't burn through me. Richard's mouth twitched, almost a smile. No, I suppose she didn't. The door opened. Lila appeared, her expression carefully neutral. Richard, I wasn't expecting you. I was in the area. Thought I'd stop by. See the place. His gaze swept the hallway, taking in the accessibility features. The professional but warm decor, the photos of participants on the wall. It's impressive. Thank you. Can we talk? Lila hesitated, then nodded. Dorian, can you give us a minute? Dorian looked at her, silently asking if she was okay. She nodded. He left, but he didn't go far. 20 minutes later, Richard emerged, his expression thoughtful. He paused when he saw Dorian standing near the front desk. She's lucky to have you, Richard said. Dorian crossed his arms. I'm lucky to have her. You love her. It wasn't a question, but Dorian answered anyway. Yes. Richard studied him for a long moment. Good. She deserves that. He started toward the door, then stopped. I was wrong about you. When I met you 2 years ago, I thought you were just another person who'd leave when things got difficult. But you didn't. No, I didn't. Why? Dorian thought about it, about the desperation that had brought him to Lila's door, about the months of learning and failing and trying again, about the way she'd challenged him and trusted him and saved him without even knowing it. Because she was worth staying for, he said simply. Richard nodded. I'm trying to do better, as a father, as a person. I know I can't undo the damage I've done, but I'm trying. That's all anyone can do. She's lucky to have someone who understands that. Richard left. Dorian found Lila still in her office, staring at her desk. You okay? He asked. He apologized. Again. Said he wants to be part of my life, really part of it, not just writing checks and making appearances. And what did you say? I said I'd think about it. She looked up at him. Am I being stupid? For even considering it? No, you're being human. What if he hurts me again? Then you'll survive it, same way you've survived everything else. Lila smiled, tired but genuine. You always know what to say. Not always, but I try. She stood from her wheelchair. She'd been doing that more often lately, standing for longer periods, walking short distances with just a cane, and crossed to where he stood, wrapped her arms around him. Dorian held her, feeling the weight of her trust, her vulnerability, her strength. I love you, she said into his chest. I love you too. 6 months later, Second Steps opened its 7th location. The ribbon-cutting ceremony was held on a bright Saturday morning in Long Beach. Local politicians showed up, news cameras, a crowd of former and current participants who'd come to celebrate. Lila gave a speech. She talked about trauma and recovery and the power of community, about the importance of giving people not just treatment, but hope, about building something that mattered. When she finished, the crowd applauded. Dorian watched from the side, Mia and Eli standing next to him. Mia was 10 now, tall and serious, and already talking about becoming a doctor. Eli was 8, still wild and optimistic, convinced he was going to be a professional soccer player. After the ceremony, Marcus wheeled over to where Dorian stood. He was doing better now, had started dating someone he'd met at the program, had gotten a part-time job doing remote consulting work, had stopped being angry at the world all the time. Hell of a thing she built, Marcus said. Yeah, it is. You helped. She did the heavy lifting. Bullshit. You two did it together. Dorian smiled. Yeah, I guess we did. Marcus nodded toward Lila, who was talking to a group of new participants, answering questions and offering encouragement. You gonna marry her? The question caught Dorian off guard. I don't know. Maybe. We haven't talked about it. Why not? Because we're busy. Because we've got 2 programs to run and 100 people depending on us, and none of that's a good reason not to ask her if you want to. Dorian looked at Marcus. When did you become a relationship expert? When I stopped being an idiot about my own life and started paying attention to other people's. Marcus grinned. Just think about it. He wheeled away, leaving Dorian standing there with a thought that wouldn't let go. He thought about it for 3 weeks. Thought about what marriage would mean. About combining their lives in a way that was official and permanent. About what his kids would think. About whether Lila even wanted that. Finally, one evening after the kids had gone to bed, Dorian called her. Hey, Lila answered. Everything okay? Yeah, can I come over? Now? It's almost 10. I know, but I need to talk to you about something. Okay, yeah. Come over. Dorian drove to her apartment in Culver City, his heart hammering the entire way. He didn't have a ring, didn't have a plan, just had a question and a hope that her answer would be yes. When she opened the door, she was in sweatpants and a t-shirt, her hair down, looking more relaxed than she ever did at work. What's going on? She asked. Dorian stepped inside, took a breath. I've been thinking about something Marcus said. Marcus. What did Marcus say? He asked me if I was going to marry you. Lila went very still. And what did you say? I said I didn't know, but I've been thinking about it ever since, and I realized something. What? I want to marry you, if you want that too. Lila stared at him. Are you asking me or telling me? I'm asking, badly, without a ring or a plan or any of the romantic stuff people are supposed to do. Dorian ran a hand through his hair, suddenly nervous. I'm just saying that I love you, that I can't imagine my life without you, that you've made me better and braver, and I want to keep building this life with you, officially. Lila's eyes filled with tears. Dorian Blake, are you proposing to me in my living room at 10 o'clock at night while I'm wearing sweatpants? Yeah, I guess I am. She laughed, a bright, joyful sound. That's the least romantic proposal I've ever heard. Is that a no? That's a yes, you idiot. Of course it's a yes. Dorian felt something in his chest unlock. Relief, joy, possibility. He crossed the room and kissed her, and she kissed him back, and for a moment, everything else fell away. When they finally pulled apart, Lila was smiling through tears. We're really doing this? Yeah, we are. Your kids are going to have opinions. My kids love you. I'm terrified of screwing this up. Me too, but we'll figure it out, same way we figured out everything else. Lila nodded, then laughed again. I can't believe you proposed without a ring. I'll get you one, tomorrow, or whenever you want. I don't need a ring, I just need you. You've got me. You've had me for a while now. I know. She leaned her forehead against his. I love you. I love you too. They told the kids the next morning over breakfast. Eli's reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. Does this mean Miss Monroe is going to be our mom? Not your mom, Dorian said carefully, but part of our family, if that's okay with you. That's awesome. Can I tell everyone at school? Mia was quieter. She looked at Lila, then at Dorian, her expression thoughtful. Are you happy, Dad? She asked. Yeah, sweetheart, I am. Then I'm happy too. She turned to Lila. You're going to be good for him. He needs someone who doesn't let him get away with stuff. Lila smiled. I'll do my best. And you're not going to replace Grandma, right? Because nobody can do that. I wouldn't want to. Your grandmother sounds like she was an incredible person. Mia nodded, satisfied. Okay, then it's good. They got married 4 months later in a small ceremony at the Second Steps main location in Culver City. It wasn't fancy, just close friends, staff, a handful of participants who'd become like family. Dr. Vance officiated. Marcus was Dorian's best man. Sandra stood up with Lila. Mia and Eli sat in the front row, dressed up and fidgeting and trying to look serious. Richard Monroe was there too, sitting in the back, watching his daughter get married with an expression that looked like regret and pride mixed together. When Lila walked down the aisle, walked with just a cane for support, having worked for months to be able to do this, Dorian felt his breath catch. She was beautiful. Not in the polished, untouchable way she'd been when he'd first met her, but in a way that was real. Human. Imperfect and scarred and absolutely radiant. They exchanged vows they'd written themselves, promised to support each other, challenge each other, forgive each other when they failed. Promised to build something together that was bigger than either of them alone. When the officiant said, "You may kiss," Dorian did, and the room erupted in applause. Afterward, during the reception, Marcus cornered Dorian again. "You did good, man," he said. "Thanks." "No, I'm serious. 2 years ago, you walked into this place broken and desperate. Look at you now." Dorian looked around the room. At Lila, laughing with Dr. Vance. At his kids, eating cake and making messes. At the people who'd come to celebrate not just a wedding, but everything they'd built together. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Look at me now." Well, a year later, Second Steps had 12 locations across Southern California and had helped over 500 people rebuild their lives after trauma and loss. Lila had been featured in national media as an advocate for disability rights and holistic recovery. She'd spoken at conferences, consulted with hospitals, and built something that had started as a desperate attempt to find purpose and become a movement. Dorian had been promoted to executive director, managing the day-to-day operations of all 12 locations, while Lila focused on big-picture strategy and expansion. They bought a house together in Mar Vista, small but accessible, with a yard where Eli could play soccer and a porch where Dorian and Lila sat most evenings, talking about their days and planning their future. Mia started middle school and joined the debate team. Eli made the travel soccer team. They both called Lila by her first name but treated her like family, which was exactly what she'd become. Richard Monroe visited once a month, always calling ahead, always respectful of boundaries. He and Lila were rebuilding their relationship slowly, carefully, with the understanding that some damage took years to heal. One evening, 2 years after they'd gotten married, Dorian and Lila sat on their porch watching the sun set over the neighborhood. "Do you ever think about how we got here?" Lila asked. "All the time. It's strange, isn't it? How one desperate decision can change everything." Dorian thought about the day he'd taken the job at her estate, about how close he'd been to losing everything, about how a woman in a wheelchair with walls around her heart had given him a chance when no one else would. "It wasn't just one decision," he said. "It was 1,000 small ones. Every day we chose to keep going. Every day we chose each other. You think we'd have made it if we hadn't met? I don't know, maybe, but it would have been harder." Lila reached over and took his hand. "I'm glad I don't have to find out." "Me too." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the light fade and the stars begin to appear. Then Lila said, "I have something to tell you." Dorian looked at her. "Okay. I've been thinking about something, and I want to know what you think before I do anything." "All right, what is it?" "I want to write a book about the program, about recovery, about what it takes to rebuild after you lose everything." "That's a great idea." "You think so?" "Yeah, people need to hear your story. It's not just my story, it's ours, yours and mine, and everyone who's come through second steps." She paused. "I want to include your perspective, how you went from being my assistant to my partner, how we built this together." Dorian thought about it, about exposing their story to the world, about putting into words all the things they'd lived through. "Okay," he said. "Let's do it." "Yeah?" "Yeah, but only if we're honest. No sugarcoating, no pretending it was easy or perfect." Lila smiled. "I wouldn't have it any other way." The book took 2 years to write. It was published by a small press that specialized in memoirs about recovery and resilience. The title was simple: Second Steps, Building a Life After Loss. It told Lila's story, Dorian's story, the stories of participants who'd given permission to share their experiences. It was honest about the pain, the setbacks, the moments of doubt and despair. But it was also honest about the hope, about what it meant to survive, about the power of showing up for each other even when, especially when, things were hard. The book sold modestly at first. Then a review appeared in a major newspaper. Then another. Then Lila was invited to speak on a podcast. Then another. Within 6 months, Second Steps, Building a Life After Loss was a bestseller. Suddenly, people everywhere were talking about the program, about Lila and Dorian and the work they'd built together, about the idea that recovery wasn't just physical, it was emotional, communal, and deeply human. Donations poured in. Partnerships formed with organizations across the country. Second Steps expanded beyond California, opening locations in Arizona, Nevada, Oregon. It was overwhelming, exhausting, and exactly what they'd hoped for. One night, after a particularly brutal day of back-to-back interviews and meetings, Lila and Dorian collapsed on the couch in their living room. "This is insane," Lila said. "Yeah. A year ago, we were barely keeping 12 locations running. Now we're talking about going national. Are you having second thoughts?" "No, just, I don't want to lose what made this special, the personal connection, the community." Dorian shifted to face her. "We won't. We'll scale carefully. We'll train people who understand what we're trying to do. We'll make sure every location feels like the first one did." "You think we can do that?" "I know we can, because we've done harder things." Lila smiled, exhausted but hopeful. "You're right. I usually am. Don't push it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, kind of silence that only came from years of knowing each other, trusting each other, building something together that was bigger than either of them alone. Finally, Lila said, "Do you ever regret it? Taking that job all those years ago?" Dorian thought about it, about the desperation and fear, about leaving his kids, about the pain of watching his mother die, about all the hard, impossible choices he'd made. "No," he said, "not for a second. Even with everything you gave up, I didn't give anything up. I traded one kind of life for another, and this one." He gestured around the room at the life they'd built, the family they'd created, the work that mattered. "This one's better." Lila's eyes filled with tears. "I love you. I love you too." Bam. 5 years later, Second Steps operated in 15 states with over 60 locations, and it helped more than 10,000 people rebuild their lives. Lila had become a national advocate for disability rights and trauma recovery. She testified before Congress, consulted with the Department of Health and Human Services, built partnerships with major healthcare systems across the country. Dorian had built the infrastructure to support it all, managing staff, coordinating logistics, ensuring that every location maintained the quality and heart that had defined the program from the beginning. They still worked side by side, still argued about budgets and strategies, still challenged each other and pushed back when they disagreed. But now, at the end of hard days, they went home together. To Mia, who was in high school now and already looking at colleges. To Eli, who was in middle school and still convinced he was going to be a professional athlete. To a life they'd built from brokenness and desperation and the simple, radical choice to keep showing up for each other. One evening, 15 years after Dorian had first walked through the gates of Lila's Beverly Hills estate with nothing but desperation and hope, they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Do you ever think about where we started?" Lila asked. "All the time. I almost fired you, after the 3rd week." Dorian looked at her, surprised. "You never told me that. I wanted to see if you'd leave on your own, if I pushed hard enough." "Why didn't you?" "Because you didn't. No matter what I threw at you, you stayed. And I realized that maybe, just maybe, you were the kind of person who actually meant what they said." Dorian smiled. "Took you 3 weeks to figure that out?" "I'm stubborn. It takes me a while." "Yeah, I noticed." Lila laughed, the sound light and free. "We saved each other, didn't we?" "Yeah, we did." "I'm glad you stayed." Me too." They sat in silence as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the stars began to emerge one by one until the sky was full of light. And Dorian thought about all the things he'd learned in the years since he'd taken that desperate job, about survival and sacrifice, about love and loss, about the difference between fixing something and building something new. Life didn't have to be perfect to be worth living. It didn't have to be easy to be meaningful. It just had to be real. And this messy, complicated, beautiful life they'd built together was as real as it got. They'd both lost so much, given up so much, fought through pain and grief and moments when it would have been easier to quit. But they hadn't quit. They'd stayed. They'd fought. They'd built something that mattered, not because they were special or exceptional or better than anyone else, but because they'd made a choice every single day to keep going, to keep believing that tomorrow could be different, to keep showing up for each other, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. And in the end, that was all anyone could do. Show up, keep trying, build something worth staying for. The rest would figure itself out.